On Memorial Day, my husband Kevin and I went to see our granddaughters. We hadn't seen them since February. And was talking to Reagan, our 6-year-old granddaughter, who said, "It's been so long, Susu, since I've seen you." I said, "I know, that darn virus." And she said, "You have the virus at your house too?" And I said, "Yeah, the virus is everywhere. It's on the whole planet." And to a 6-year-old, that's really hard to comprehend, that this invisible thing is around all of us. So too can be really hard to understand that this God, Spirit, this invisible thing is always with us, no matter what, in every situation, in every circumstance. With the pandemic, these last few months, with the murder of George Floyd, the protests, the riots, all the things that we're seeing in our society, it can be really challenging to us to say, or to wonder, or to see that Spirit is here with us, that God is here. We may ask, where is God in all this? And so we thought that it would be good for us here, the Columbine community, to get back to the basics, to look at our teachings, our unity teachings, and see how do they fit in with everything that's going on right now. Are they still relevant? Is it still true? A principle is something that is true no matter which way you look at it. Spiritual truth. You can look at it from any angle, any time frame, and it's always going to be true. And so our 5 basic principles that we teach in unity are truth. I'm going to be referring to the book by Ellen Davenport. She's a unity minister. She wrote this book called The 5 Principles. And she wrote this after being in ministerial school. It was Connie Fillmore, the great-granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity, who in 1990 published an article that put our basic teachings into 5 different principles. And she wrote an article on it. And Ellen Davenport studied these in ministerial school. And there wasn't any book on this, so she wrote a book on the 5 basic principles. It's available on Amazon if you want to grab a copy, but it's really a small little book, but filled with lots of spiritual truth. The first principle is there is only one power, one presence in the universe, and that is God. That is God the good. And that God, that Spirit, whatever word you want to use for God, if you get triggered by using the word God, use some other word. Use whatever word fits for your belief system. Could be spirit, could be divine mind, could be universe, the field, whatever it is for you, but there's only that one power, that one presence. And it is omnipotence, meaning it is all power, the only power that is real. It is also omniscience, all knowledge, all wisdom comes from this one. And it is also omnipresence, meaning that it is in totality, everywhere present at the same time. It's hard to wrap our human minds around that. It's infinite, it's unchanging, it's absolute. We can count on it. God is all there is. And everything, the substance of everything, every creation is divine. It can be really hard to see that, especially when we're challenged in our lives and it's human things. But this is the principle that maintains that we are all one. Ellen says this on page 24, the principle of oneness, that we are in God and God is in us, that we are one with each other and with all the universe, may be lovely and inspiring on the surface, but it is difficult to describe and even more difficult to live. Isn't that the truth? Just look at the events of the last couple weeks. We can see how difficult it is to get this concept of oneness, that we are all connected. Spiritually, we are all one, but in our humanness, we don't live in the absolute realm with perfect ideas. But that's our challenge, to try to see that light in each other, see that divine in everyone. And I mean everyone. Those people you don't like, those people you don't resonate with, those people that you don't believe the same way, don't agree with, the ones who hurt you, the white supremacists and the gang member and the rioters, those with different political views. We are all one. When we see people as others and we dehumanize them, we are operating on the human plane, not the absolute, not the divine realm, as God intended. This has been a challenging talk to prepare for me. I was talking to Steve and Vicki Larson the other night and saying how I don't know how to talk about racism and bring in our teachings. And my feelings about it are all over the place. Feelings of helplessness and feeling uncomfortable and confused and not sure what to do. And Steve Larson said, you should listen to Tara Brock's podcast from June 3rd. It was perfect because she put into words so eloquently exactly how I was feeling and asked forgiveness for if there's any lack of understanding on my part, lack of sincerity, lack of sympathy, lack of compassion when we talk about this. It's uncomfortable. And we have to let it be uncomfortable. We need to sit in that discomfort. We don't grow if we're comfortable. We don't look for personal transformation or try to change things for the better when we're comfortable. We do it when we're uncomfortable, when something's pushing up against us, when we're hurting. But we need to stay awake. We need to stay aware of what's going on and not shy away from difficult conversations. It's so easy to do. I did it this week with my parents. We need to stand up. Stand up to racism. Stand up to fear and prejudice. Don't give power to the evil. I love in Ellen's book, she has these sections where she says, yes, but. Yes, but. Yes, we are one. Yes, there is one power and one presence, but, well, one of the buts is, what about the evil that we see in the world? What about that? It's challenging to see oneness when we see people hurting each other. But we're not to give power. The evil has no power of its own. It has only the power that we give it. It's hard to see with our human eyes that all is good, that God is with us in everything, in every situation. We don't see the big picture. We don't know why things are happening as they are. We're not seeing through a spiritual lens. So if we're all one, why do bad things happen to good people? As human beings, we give a lot of power to our own privilege. If we're white, we give a lot of power to that. Maybe not knowingly. And this is not to blame or to judge, but to be aware. As human beings, we seem to give a lot of power due to fear, greed, arrogance, wanting to be in control. And Ellen says one of the reasons why we may experience evil in the world, she says on page 26, the human species is immature. The Aramaic word that became evil in the Bible is bisha, which means immature or unripe. Hence the biblical reference to evil fruit. It wasn't ripe. We as humans are immature or unripe, not yet living from the divine consciousness. We have a lot to learn. As a society in America, we're about maybe teenagers. Maybe not even that old. We each have our own part to do. And it starts with looking within and looking at where we allow racism, where we allow fear to dominate, where we allow ourselves to be arrogant or ignorant. There's a teacher in 1968 teaching third grade in Riceville, Iowa. Maybe you've heard of her. It was a very small town, 1,000 people, all white. And the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, her third graders came into the room and said, "Why did they shoot a king?" They didn't understand, and so she tried to explain to them about prejudice and discrimination and racism. And the third graders weren't quite understanding it. They weren't quite getting it. And so she had an idea to try and experiment with them. I don't know that it would fly in today's age with schools. But she went into the classroom the next day and said, "We're going to try an experiment so you can understand how it feels to be discriminated against. And we're going to use the color of your eyes." So everyone with blue eyes or green eyes, blue eyes or green eyes, you are special. You are privileged. You get extra attention. You get extra privileges. Those with brown eyes, you're not as smart. You don't get to drink from the water fountain. You don't get to play on the playground equipment. You cannot talk to anyone with blue eyes. In blue eyes, you get extra helpings, second helpings at lunch. And you get 10 extra minutes of recess. Brown eyes, you don't get that. And she said, "And where's the most fun place to sit in the classroom?" And all the kids said, "In the front." She said, "Okay, the blue eyes, you get to sit in the front. Brown eyes, go to the back of the room." Now, this is quite radical for 1968 to do something like this with white children. But she quickly saw how the children with blue eyes came right into that role. They started feeling like they were special. They started treating the brown-eyed kids as less than. They put collars on the brown-eyed kids so they could recognize them from a distance, that they were inferior. The blue-eyed kids that day scored much higher than they had in the past on tests and flashcards. The brown-eyed kids scored much lower. The next day, they came into the classroom and the teacher said, "I made a mistake. It's not the blue eyes that are special, that are superior, it's the brown-eyed kids. And so I want all you brown-eyed kids to take your collar off and put it on a blue-eyed kid, because they're nothing. They're not special. And you blue-eyed kids, now you go sit in the back of the room. You don't get to play on the playground equipment. You don't get to talk to the brown-eyed kids. You don't get to drink from the water fountain, and you don't get seconds at lunch." Now, this seems like a real cruel thing to do to kids. 15 years later, obviously that was a day each for the blue eyes, a day for the brown eyes to be the superior kids. 15 years later, when the kids were now young adults in their 20s and they came back for their high school reunion, they talked about how that changed them, about how they were more aware of discrimination and racism, about how they looked at people differently, and how it didn't matter the color of the skin as to the value of the person. Jane Elliott went on to do this in lots of workplaces and other schools and lots of different places. She was interviewed on Oprah several times, and she made a difference. And in one of her interviews, she said, "I will spend probably the rest of my life getting rid of the privilege that I have inside of me." Because our society is built around the privilege. It is designed for white people to feel privileged. A few weeks ago, Scott and I did a class that we have to do each year on inclusivity and ethics. And part of the class was taking a little quiz, little self-assessment. We had 14 questions we had to answer. And the higher your score, the more privileged you were. Well, I never thought I was privileged. We didn't grow up with a lot of money. I was the oldest of 6 kids, and I never, ever thought of myself as privileged. But on that test, I scored 12 out of 14. Some of the things we take for granted, like having enough food to eat, not getting evicted, never having your utilities shut off, those are privilege. And we take those for granted. So our job is to look within. Where are we privileged as white people? I'm assuming most that are tuning in are white. Where are we privileged? We should be constantly evolving and waking up and coming into greater awareness of the oneness that we are. Just like eye color is beyond our control as we come into this human life, so is the color of our skin. Why should it matter when it comes to value in a life? I'm hoping that the murder of George Floyd and all the protests that have been going on since then makes a difference. But we can't just sit back and hope for that. We have to do something. We have to look within our own selves and find, where is prejudice and racism in my consciousness. Because if we grew up white in America, it's probably there. But it doesn't mean that it has to stop there. Gracie Allen was George Burns' wife, and she said long ago, "Never place a period where God has placed a comma." This isn't over. We're evolving, and hopefully we're waking up. And we can stand up for the Black people. We can stand up for them. There's lots of things we can do. If you just Google, what can I do as a white person to help our Black communities? In Tara Brock's podcast of June 3rd, she shared a story that I want to share with you. She talked about the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which was dedicated in 2018. It's in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was, the nonprofit behind it is the Equal Justice Initiative, founded by Brian Stevenson. And in this memorial, there's a whole hall full of jars of soil. And these jars of soil are the actual soil of the places where Blacks were lynched. They did years of research, many are unknown, but they did years of research to find out the stories and the names and the dates and birthplaces of these Black men and women who were lynched. They researched it for years, and they found 4,400 jars of soil in this memorial, in this museum. Those who were lynched between 1877 and 1950. The memorial opened in 2018. But Tara shared a story about one of the women who went to collect the soil. Now, mostly it was descendants and some volunteers who went to these places where the blood fell from these people who were lynched, where their ashes may be in the ground. And these are pretty big jars. You can't tell from the picture, but they're pretty big jars. So this one Black woman went to collect the soil from this place where a lynching took place. And she had the name of the person, and she had a memo about that person. And she was really nervous about it. And they told all of them that if somebody questions you, you can say, "I'm just collecting soil for my garden." So as she was collecting the soil, a white man in a pickup truck was slowly driving by and looking at her. And she was really nervous. And he drove very slowly by and kept staring at her. She kept going and collecting her soil. And the man stopped his truck and got out of the truck, and he was a very big man. And he asked her what she was doing. And she said in that moment, she could say that she was collecting soil for her garden, but something came over her and she told him what she was doing. Somebody was lynched here. I'm collecting the soil that may contain his blood and his ashes. And she handed him the memo of the person. And she didn't know what he was going to do, but he knelt down and he said, "Can I help you?" And she said, "Yes, of course." And so he dug his hands into that soil, and he was putting the soil in the jar. And as she watched him, she started crying, and he said, "I'm sorry, I've upset you." She said, No, you've blessed me. This is good for me to see you doing this." And as they were finishing, she noticed him that he had slowed down, and she said, she noticed that he was shedding some tears. And she said, "Are you okay? What is going on with you?" And he said, "I'm afraid that my grandparents may have been the one to lynch this man. And you have blessed me by allowing me to help you." In that moment, they felt their oneness. They weren't black woman and white man. They were two humans mourning the loss of someone who had died there, who was brutally murdered there. This is ours to do. Figure out what is ours to do. Ellen says on page 32 of the 5 Principles, God does not ride to the rescue. What we call God is a force of energy, not a supernatural being that intervenes in our lives. How that divine energy expresses or doesn't is up to us. What are we going to do to stop racism, to be anti-racist? Tara posed some questions that I thought were in her podcast on June 3rd that I thought were really good. How do we hold that part, that we are part of a race that has caused so much pain? How do we hold that? We didn't enforce slavery, but we're part of a race that did. How have the societal habits of privilege stopped you from listening to the cries of those who are suffering? What would help you listen more deeply to the cries? We need to acknowledge our own feelings. We need to acknowledge our own privilege, not with judgment or blame, but practice being aware and being awake, and not letting this event and these protests just dwindle off. Have them mean something. Show that we believe in oneness. We can use the RAIN process that we've been studying these last 7 weeks from Tara. Recognize our emotions. Acknowledge them. Investigate them. And nurture ourselves. For it's only after we do that for ourselves that we can do it for others. We can ask for guidance on how we can do better for Black people. Then we can take action. We are all one. That is our unity teaching. There's one power, one presence. Taking responsibility for our part in the racial divide is really important to our healing as a nation, as a planet, as a society. Nelson Mandela says this: "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." Our invitation is to stay open to love. Stay open to the oneness. Stay open to our first unity principle that there is only one power and one presence, and each of us is a unique expression of that oneness. Celebrate our oneness and our diversity. I want to invite you now into a time of meditation. And I'm going to use the meditation that Ellen Davenport has with this chapter on this first principle. So I invite you to gently close your eyes, get yourself centered. I enter into the stillness to align myself with the one mind, the one presence that permeates all of creation. I feel myself as a part of this creation, connected to all of nature. I am the light and the darkness. I am the oceans and the land. I am the rocks and trees, the fish and birds, the beasts of the earth, and I am one with every human being on the planet. In this oneness, I sense the order of all things. I feel the divine love that moves in me and in every molecule of the cosmos. I know the divine intelligence that is the foundation of all that is or ever will be. I am one with all. And we'll hold that in the silence. I am one with all. From Unity Worldwide Ministries, a prayer for the wounded heart of humanity. We call upon God's love in this important moment, knowing that divine love is the greatest power in the universe. We pray for the wounded heart of humanity as we grieve, rage, cry, and despair over injustice and inequity. May divine love enfold and comfort everyone who is hurting. May divine wisdom guide each person and institution in taking inspired action to ensure that all are celebrated for their inherent goodness as a part of God's creation. May we remain resolute in walking the course of human rights and social justice for all. We pray in the spirit of unity, love, and oneness. Amen.